As time moves forward, as technology changes and grows, as the infrastructure of companies continue to ebb and flow, one thing remains the same. A leader has to produce. This is the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast, a transformational leadership approach that's centered around three core concepts: vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity. On this show, you'll learn how to be open and honest with yourself and with others, while also developing trust, empathy, and respect within your team. You'll learn how to empower them to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities. This is the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. And now your host, Edward E. Mosley Jr.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. And like always, we have a guest today that I think you're going to be just amazed by his background, his knowledge, and his experience. And without belaying the time, we're going to bring him on. Our guest today is James Zeigler. And James, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you here. And like we kind of discussed, I just want you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your what you do in your OODA loop in your world. And I want you to tell us your definition of leadership and what leadership means to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great honor to be here. My name is James Zeigler. I'm retired from the Veterans Health Administration, and I was a senior executive service member appointed. When I retired, I became a bit of a professional coach and wrote a book. We'll talk a little bit about that. Live in Wisconsin, and it's kind of funny because we're Lions fans from Detroit, and so living in Wisconsin's a little different, but it makes it exciting. And our grandkids are just down the road from our house, so being retired here and then doing this, and it's so important that I get to be on your podcast and talk about something that's so near and dear to my heart, which is leadership. And I really appreciate the question. It's my definition, because if you don't have a definition of leadership, you're very likely not a leader. So my definition of leadership is that you rely on your history, you rely on mentors, and you rely on coaching. This is a book that I've had on my desk since the day I became a leader. It's Lincoln on Leadership, and it's by Donald T. Phillips. It's an amazing book that characterizes one of the greatest leaders of all time, Abraham Lincoln, one of our presidents, the 16th. And every time I open this book, I find something that is germane to something that is going on my day that day. So leadership is really servant leadership. I really think about the organizational chart. Every time you take a job as a leader, right? You go in and you say, show me the organizational chart. And you look at this thing, and it goes with this little box at the top, and then a whole bunch of little boxes here, and then a whole bunch of little boxes here, and then all kinds of boxes that go down. It's upside down. We've had that upside down for a very long time. And some of the struggles I'll talk about are because I wanted to tip that thing upside down.
Yeah. James, you must be reading my mind, man, because about a month ago, I don't know what I was doing. I was looking at something, and I have a chart. I have a pyramid, right? And I start at the bottom of the pyramid. It's called levels of transformational leadership, right? And so I really believe that in order for leaders to be good leaders, they have to know themselves. They have to find themselves. They have to have self-discovery. So the bottom of the pyramid, that quadrant is self-discovery. Then as we move up the pyramid, the middle piece is mastering change, because now you know yourself. Now you're able to help others and implement and empower, others. And as you get to the top of the pyramid, it's all about strategic management. And we have a lot of people within leadership positions that are managers, but they don't grasp the understand of the strategy of the big picture. And I was sitting at my desk the other day, about a month or so ago, and for some reason I said, what if I flip this? What if I flip this pyramid upside down? And
there it is.
I just thought about, in order, and I read somewhere in in a class I was taking, I'm paraphrasing, but what the gentleman was saying was, if we took that structure, that organizational structure, and turned it upside down, then the leader is basically empowering those others to grow up and out.
Yeah.
And it's an empowerment piece that many cannot even fathom doing that.
Yeah.
Because you have to serve people. Real leaders know how to serve people to get the best out of them, which ultimately will bring the best, performance for the organization and the team. But that is a concept that is hard for leaders to grasp, turning that structure upside down. And before the other piece that I think is important is, we have been operating in this traditional, authoritative, transactional style of leadership and structure for years. And what I know happened is COVID threw that out of whack. It just discombobulated and flipped it in all different directions. And we pivoted. Some organizations pivoted, and they did hybrids, they did virtuals. And now all of a sudden it's like, that didn't work, which we know it did. Now we need everybody back in the office. We got to get back to this old way of doing business. Are we going in the right direction, James? I know that's a big question.
That's a $10 million question that above my pay grade. My personal view and perspective on that is that it appears to be going in the opposite direction of the destination. However, change brings opportunity.
Yes.
That's the middle of your triangle.
Yeah.
If we don't have change and we don't embrace it, and it takes faith, man, it takes a lot of faith when change is coming your way.
Yeah.
You have to have faith in your team and your leaders. That's why it's so important that if you don't have a leadership definition, you're probably not a leader, So you really have to have a philosophy, and the people that are part of the organization that you support, they have to trust you and have faith in you that through this change, you're going to tell them everything that you know, because you may not know things. When I was running a hospital, man, one of my colleagues told me, he said, if you know 25% of what is happening in your hospital, you're a really good medical center director.
Yeah.
I'm like, what about that other 75%, the scary stuff, where, people are doing things in hallways, people are diverting drugs, people are, taking money off the top of things. And that's kind of what's going on right now with our government, is they're discovering that there may be some of this fraud, waste, and abuse. And it kind of goes back to my Air Force days, because guess what I did in the Air Force? I worked for the Air Force Audit Agency.
Okay.
And I used to draft and present reports to the commander of things like the $5,000 hammer and toilet seat.
Yeah.
So when this is all coming up, it's like, to me, it's almost like deja vu, like, wow, here we go again, And these are a lot bigger numbers than the hammer costs. But to your question about the direction, I think the jury may still be out. And the only reason for that is I believe that the the American flag is set in a way that the definition, the intention of it is that there is a diversity of America. We've got a statue in the middle of we were recognized by the French that you guys are the place where people come when they need help. That said, there also has to be some rules on how that operates and how that works. And sometimes when you take over, I remember one situation that really stood out to me, that I had an organization that really, really, really was toxic from the very beginning. And I was told, when you go in there, you're gonna be firing people.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little bit of pressure from this direction, right? So the leader has this pushing down on top of them from in my experience in the VA, you've got your VISN and you've got your secretary and a lot of other program offices that are all throwing information at you at once. Some of these are the programs that are being questioned today. So in the sense of getting all that pressure, you're responsible. And I would go to COVID with this too. I remember very, very specifically one day when we made like 8 changes in one day. There were Chinese counterfeit masks. There were, nobody's got any shields. There was, oh, you got to wipe every single surface. Oh, you got to clean all your uniforms. Oh, you got to have these rooms where people take off their clothes, put on their clothes. Oh, wait a minute now, who's taking off what? I mean, it was just chaos.
Chaos. Yep.
And to lead through that, it took a leadership definition, and it took some clarity of how I am going to lead, not necessarily what I am going to lead, because that changed dramatically. But how I was going to lead had to always be. And I always told everybody whenever I got hired, I'm here to support you. I'm here to remove barriers and help you do what you do best and get out of your way.
Yeah.
That's my job. And that got me a whole lot of hell.
Yeah, I can imagine, you know,
because there are people that want their BMWs and their suits and their ties. You can't relate to your team that way. That's old, and we really do need to leave that in the past.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really, really good points, and I think that's one of the things that has really stumped me with everything that's going on. It's like the more information that people know, that honest, authentic, information, how it's rolled out, how it's presented, I think that's key. I think that's very key. And the other thing that I've always been I've always been that person that cares about people. And I think, that you just talked about this. Change is something that's always going to happen, and
inevitable.
It's inevitable. And unless you're used to change, then it's going to be uncomfortable. But when I look at an organization and you talk about toxic environments and things of that nature, I just feel as though the last part of, I guess, the last effort of any big change should be cutting people. I think there's a way that, and I'm all for the, why are we wasting dollars on buying new furniture when we haven't been in buildings for whatever years, or the furniture is still good? I get it. I'm not questioning that. But I have seen organizations where they keep, employees on board or supervisors on board that need to go.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get all of that.
Yeah.
And then we're hearing the big thing now is you're talking about probationary employees and
Yes.
stuff like that. I just don't know if that's the right initial step to get to the end result that we want to get to it in any organization. You know, forget that it's the, you know, it's coming under the administration. Just in any organization, you know, you made the point that when you went into an organization and you knew it was a toxic environment, and you know, I'm sure in your thinking and your process, you obviously had some note in your mind that it's coming from certain people or certain, you know, departments or certain songs. So I get that. But as a leader, you know, how are you able to be transparent but still have a mission that you may have to let this person go?
And now you're reading my mind, because I was only going to give you one word.
Right.
Mission.
Yeah.
I'm a veteran. You're a veteran.
Yeah.
I use the Veterans Hospital, and I'm not ashamed to say that I sustained injuries while I was in the service that have garnered my family benefits. Day I got that letter, I felt like I'm disabled.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, I'm a CEO. I don't. And then number two was, I don't deserve this. And then my wife said, she said, honey, we deserve this.
Yeah.
Those injuries that you've gone through, those have been the roots of some of the things that have happened in our home.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, you're right, babe. So mission is first. Has to be. And if you're a leader and you haven't actually identified that, then your organization is really, truly going to fail backward instead of forward. Failing forward is you get back up and you go a little bit more forward and you fall again and then you learn. But when you fall backwards, you're not getting anywhere but further behind.
Yeah.
And that's because you don't have a mission. The Bible says if the people don't have a vision, then the people perish.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So without it, it's really important. So when you get in the room, and what comes to my mind was, you know, there were veterans waiting for care. And it was an administrative situation. Yet there were clinical influences that wanted to hang on to certain parts of the administrative functions. They didn't know anything about the job at all. They just wanted to have their family on the floor of the hospital. Nurses, doctors, therapists, clerks. But the clerks didn't really belong anywhere. And isn't the bottom of Maslow's triangle, isn't that self-belonging? Yep. So if you don't belong to something, you don't know the mission, you don't have the vision of what it is, you can't lead that. That's totally a GPS that has no batteries in it.
Yeah, I agree. Anytime, even organizations that I'm a part of, and you know, it's funny because, you know, I sit back and I look at you know, various organizations that I'm a part of. I've been a part of for years, and you sit there, excuse me, you sit there and you kind of like, wow, they're not functioning properly, or the way I see it, and you just talked about it. Every department should know how they fit within the organizational goals, objectives.
Yeah.
And if they don't, you know, you start operating in these little silos.
Yep.
And teams are not aligned with anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know why the veterans are waiting for care?
Yeah.
Because the clerks weren't flexible for the whole organization. So when clerk A called off sick, clerk A's work wasn't getting done because clerk B was being held hostage by another mission, not an unimportant mission whatsoever, but as the CEO, you got to be thinking about the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is the mission. And if the clerk at the very front lines or the housekeeper of the hospital, the people that meet the veteran first, or don't have a voice, then you don't know what's going on in your hospital, and you can't lead that. And that's how I approached it. And some people were drinking the Kool-Aid. Others were like, that's kryptonite. Don't want anything to do with this guy. This guy's going to turn around and change everything we've ever done. And that polarization, I learned, was very stressful for myself, stressful on the organization. And I had to do a lot of introspection on my belief system of how to lead in certain organizations. It's not always the same.
And I know I always pull back, and one of the things that I pull, and I was looking at some of your topics that you talk about, and they were very interesting. Excuse me. And one of the things that I remember, I was an E4. I was a corporal. Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and I was attached to the my job. I was responsible for driving the Humvee for the colonel, the sergeant major, and the OPSO, and I had the distinct job to drive in Desert. We was in Desert Storm at this point. We were going in Desert Storm, and we was breaching, Kuwait. And here's this IED landfill, and the engineers had gave us a path to drive through, but it's about the width of a Humvee. So if you go too far right, too far left, you're gone. And I had this colonel who was he reminded me of the Marlboro Man, this hard, stern face. And he's sitting there smoking a cigarette, and he's like, well, you're going to kill us, aren't you, Mosley? Just going to drive over a landmine, aren't you? And I'm like, no, sir, I got it. So it's like, you're talking chaos. You're talking leadership in chaos.
Wow.
How do you, I pull on that when I look at how we're currently operating within organizations right now. I had a coaching session, and the guy that I was coaching, he has 12 employees, and they're looking to him for some type of comfort, some type of reliance that everything is going to be okay. And he was struggling, and he asked me if that's what we could talk about in our session. I said, sure, and I'm like, so what is it that you feel as though you're obligated to tell them? At the end of the day, with all of the orders and all of the changes that are coming through, you can't control any of it.
Yep. It was just like COVID. There was no controlling that. There was media that was explosive and was accusatory and was causing people to have a fear response, And when we get to that fear response, we got three choices, right? We could be afraid and freeze. We can put up on the gloves and start a fight, or we can retreat and run away. And these are physiological responses that happen within our body in the brainstem, which also is the same location as where you're breathing and your heart rate is at. So these core things are all turned on. We call it in the military vigilance, right? Hyper vigilance was the term that they made up for. You've got enemy everywhere, and you don't know which one's going to pull the trigger first to just make it raw. The same thing happens in leadership. You got enemy everywhere, and you don't know who's going to pull the trigger first. Is it going to be the union? Is it going to be your secretary? Is it going to be your second in command? Who's going to be the one that is so nervous about the situation that they respond to one of those three choices.
Yeah. I have a right saying on my wall, but I always live by this is leadership is like war.
Mm,
It is. To your point, you know, during the same time, most leaders in any combat, they never stay in one location. They're
that's right.
always we did something. I think I'm sure they're still doing it, but I remember learning a technique called leapfrogging. And it was the command and control would be in the front one time, then another commander would be in the front, and you would leapfrog back and forth, so the enemy never knew,
That's right.
you know,
Which one had the brass?
right, which one had it. And so, that's how I always I've used that in leadership situations to say, okay, you hear this coming from this person, you
Yeah.
see this being done by this group of people.
Yeah.
Your employees are saying this, so where's that happy balance, that happy medium, and we've went through so many iterations of leadership styles, but it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to your point. If you don't know what your definition of leadership is, if you don't know what your leadership style is, or if you can't pivot to different styles at different situations, then
Mm-hmm.
you are doing a disservice to those that you lead.
And that's what you were talking about with the kind of quasi-political elephant in the room thing that's
Yeah.
going on,
Yeah.
right? Is we have people in organizations that should be offered an offer of amnesty. If you don't want to be a supervisor and you were, say, I'm not picking on anybody in particular, so nurses don't put a whole bunch of comments in the chat or anything like that right now. It's not really about anybody in particular. I'm just going to use that as an example. So there's a nurse who goes to college, does her best that she could possibly do, gets into a hospital, becomes a great nurse, and they say, "Man, you are just a really great nurse. We'd like you to, run this performance improvement team."
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hey, you did such a great job on that performance improvement team that now we'd like you to be a shift leader.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'll be a shift leader. Yeah, but you're not supervising anybody. You don't have to write any reports. You don't have to do any of this stuff. And then that person, that nurse at that point, this is where it starts to happen. This is when leadership starts to suck
Yeah.
because I got no authority, but I got authority, but I got to get it from this person to give it to that person. And I've got eyes and I've got experience now that I can see that there's something wrong with the process, but there's also something going on with this person.
Yeah.
And needs, conduct versus performance. So, but then that same person that doesn't get any education or training on how to be a shift leader now becomes a charge nurse.
Yeah.
And then a service line chief, and then the top nurse in the hospital. And by the time that they get to that particular point, it could be an accountant, right? It could be a housekeeper that moves up into the executive realm. It's that journey that you're learning a lot from your experience, but what you're not really getting is rubber meets the road type of, in the military, we have buddy system.
Yeah.
If you have to go to the bathroom, you're going to go to the bathroom with that buddy right there. You're going over there and you're going to come right back here. If we're going to send you somewhere, we're sending you that support. If organizations would start to look at this a little bit more like the military,
Yeah.
maybe they'd be onto something. To have that friend in need, indeed, right there. The VA does a very good job of leadership programs.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that 20% of those leaders, and this is just my figure, pulling it out, but probably about 20% of the leaders that go through those programs actually are successful implementing what it is that they learned and have probably, because of the strong desire they have to implement it and the tenacity to get through the resistance that might be there.
Yeah.
It can't be a one and done.
I do agree with you there. But I also would add the numbers. So there is a great success rate once leaders get into the leadership programs.
I've been in every single one the VA offered,
The
all the way to the
problem,
top.
the problem with that is the average year, I think the last stat I looked at was about 7 years in
Yeah,
a leadership position before they actually start getting leadership development.
there it is.
So what have they done in those 7 years that have negatively impacted the organization or the people or the someone's career? And the other piece I would say is in most situations we don't provide leadership development or coaching or mentoring until a person is more senior in
Hmm.
federal service or any position.
Yep,
The entry level employee is not getting mentorship or coaching. And we're seeing it at that. I guess if you're looking at it from a 20-year perspective, most of the times they're not getting any type of leadership development roughly until they're in some supervisory position, maybe you're 15 or something,
exactly.
and that's
Yeah,
too late. That's too late.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
too late.
It is. And it's easy to fix.
Yeah, it is. It is. So tell us a little bit about Behold Coaching. What is that one thing that why did you start the business?
Well, it was December 24th, 2022, and I told my wife it was probably about 7 o'clock. I'm gonna go to bed. I don't feel good. And as I was going around the corner, I realized, man, I can't breathe. I can't even talk. And so I went to bed and couldn't go to sleep. Had this just unbelievable pain in my right side.
Mhm.
Um, that about 11 o'clock at night, things started getting very serious. And that's when something happened that many people will go, "Oh, wow, that's out there," but it's my experience. So you could take it, you can leave it, but it was my experience,
Mhm.
and I'm convinced, fully convinced, that there was a presence in my room, possibly an angel, um, that was telling me turn over and call a hospital. And physically, I felt being pushed off my right side to my left side.
Hmm.
I'd equate it to sort of Jacob and his hip, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so finally at 1 o'clock in the morning, I called. Now remember, I'm a VA medical center executive, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also a veteran. So I called the VA and I said, I need to, figure out what's going on with me. And the nurse said, you're having a cardiac arrest or pulmonary embolism. I'm like, no way. Uh-uh. I just had knee surgery about 3 weeks prior, and the anesthesia was kind of goofy, and I had all kinds of rationalizations in my head. So, being an executive in the VA and being a veteran, if an ambulance comes to your house, you got to get in it, or you're going
Yeah.
to get a bill. So the ambulance guys came in and they tested me and they said, "Sir, there's nothing wrong with you." I'm like, I knew that. Now I got to get in that ambulance, go to this hospital. So I get in the ambulance, go to the hospital, and I meet a doctor that I had no idea we had a likeness in faith.
Mhm.
And but I have always been a truth teller. That's kind of the thing I lean toward, and integrity. So I told the doctor my story, and he said, okay, thank you for telling me the rest of the story. On Christmas Eve, this doctor in Las Vegas called in an entire interventional radiology team, the only one in the state that did this particular procedure.
Mhm.
And about 7 hours later, he he said to me, came into my room, and he said, "You've got hundreds of clots in your leg, your hip, and your lungs. And now listen very carefully. And your cortisol levels are astronomical." I'm
Wow.
like, "What's that mean, doc?" He says, "There's so much pressure against your heart right now. You've got minutes to live. And I have a team ready to do a procedure." I'm like, well, I guess we got to do this. So now fast forward again. You'd think that was easy choice. But when I got into the room, I also, as part of my military service, had a supervisor, just like what you were talking about, who decided at one point in his life that it was okay to stand behind a younger airman and rub his genitals on his shoulders
Mm.
while he was typing a message every single Friday
Wow.
for an entire year. So that was in here, and that was in here, and that was in here. And I'm laying on a table, and I told the doctor, I said, Doc, I gotta be out. There should be no knowledge of what is happening here to me. And here's why. And he goes, I get it. You're going to be asleep. Okay. Well, I wasn't asleep, and they were, getting a little personal with their cleaning job.
Mm-hmm.
And I freaked out. PTSD came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an affinity for nurses. My daughter is one. And this particular nurse was an older, seasoned nurse. And she came over and she grabbed my hand. She says, hey, are you going to really let fear grip you to the point you've got minutes to live?
Hmm.
You're flawless. I'll hold your hand. Now, about a month earlier, I had a friend that told me to listen to the song Flawless. I mean, if you don't have goosebumps right now, you're not human,
Yeah.
And I had the procedure. And then I took a job right after that I had no idea how I had that pulmonary embolism. I didn't know what was going on with this cortisol thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
kept saying to myself, I got to research this. I got to find out what's this cortisol thing and how does it impact leaders or people?
Mm-hmm.
And then it really started to evolve. And then it got so bad in the job that I was in and so toxic that I no longer had the strength to do
Yeah.
it. I was sitting at the end of a table with, 50 to 70 some people there every day. And I walked out. I called my boss and I said, this is not good for me. It's not good for the organization. And I cannot continue to do this
Yeah.
in this environment. Now, that's not just like, somebody on the job. That's the king of the castle is
Right.
no longer here.
Right.
And there's no real notification as to what it was. But it was that wake up moment that I didn't listen to, and made it about another year after that wake up moment before I really truly woke up. And then I came back to Wisconsin because we had nowhere else to go. VA had paid for my move, and we got here, and it was a struggle to find a house, etc. When we finally kind of settled in, that's when it happened.
Yeah.
That's when I went. I mean, I 8 months of therapy
Mm-hmm.
and 2 moments of suicidal ideation that made the therapy a little bit longer,
Yeah.
and a family member who's struggling with alcoholism.
Yeah.
And it was just so much. And I thought, gosh, I left that to come to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I prayed, and coaching came to my mind.
Yeah.
And I reached out to a couple of people, and I'm proud to say right now I'll have a PCC in maybe a month or two.
Oh, congratulations.
Got over 500 hours in that amount of time. While dealing with all of that other stuff, I was on a screen just like we are now with, dozens of clients paying me coffee to
Yeah.
to get my hours as I was going through school in the Professional Christian Coaches Institute. And it's all coming together this month. And that's where behold came, was because there's 1,200 scriptures in the Bible that all begin with the word behold. And in coaching, that moment, that is the value, that's the money shot for coaching sessions for people. This is why people have coaches
Mm-hmm.
like you and me, is because they have that aha.
Yeah.
They're pursuing something they're stuck on, and all of a sudden, aha. And I didn't put two and two together. I had a client one day said, you know what? That's not an aha moment. That's a behold moment.
Wow.
And from that point forward, I mean, it just like spread through my clients that when they get to that point, they're like, hey, I think that was a behold. I'm like, okay, well, tell me about it. It's just so cool. It's just so cool. And then at the same time, parallel with that, I reached out to a few people and I said, hey, would you interview with me about your experience in leadership and at work? Yeah. And that's when it's just, stonewalled into this.
And that's called the chemical courage.
Yeah, chemical courage, reframing the bully within for a healthier world. Most people, if you ask them about a problem that they have at work, they will externalize it.
Yeah.
It's about somebody out there that's bullying me. The truth of the matter is, folks, it's the inner voice that's bullying you mostly.
Yeah.
That's the place where you hear the messages that mean the most, that hurt the most, that hit the truth that we want to deny. And the whole concept of this is that contract, partner with the bully within. Don't fight it. That's part of you. That's part of your skills. It's part of your strength. It's probably saved you from getting pulled over by a cop someday. I mean, there are things.
You know what I call that, right?
What do you call that?
I call that self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
It's that inner voice. Yep. It's that inner voice that we have to, I call it quieting the noise.
Yeah.
It's that inner person, that our inner self, that we just, we talk ourselves out of things.
That's right.
Or we talk ourselves into things.
Yeah, that's right.
Or we talk ourselves into believing things.
That's right.
And with that being said, how does, tell a person, talk to the audience, tell them, how do they get out of the way, their own way? Obviously there is a physical person that could potentially be more authoritative, maybe bullying. But I think when I look at the other side of that, I look at, we are allowing them to do it.
Yeah. Just like the guy standing behind me.
Yeah.
For a year that I never told anybody about, never told my wife about it. All I did was come home and throw shoes.
Yeah.
And was pretty angry elf from the South Pole.
Yeah.
And that on top of traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah.
It's amazing I even made it where I did.
I gotta admit, there were, we have some of the same issues that we've been through, and veteran and PTSD, and I was a casualty escort, and that was an experience in itself. I escorted 12 Marines home to their final destinations. And, to have, I used to tell people I cried on the inside. And I would, I had a family. I was a leader in the military, but I would remove all of that and go and perform this job. And then I would get all that emotion from that family. Then I would come back home to my family. So I had these different, I think sometimes as leaders, we have all these different, I don't want to call them facades, but we have these different people we are, personalities.
Yeah.
And when I always coach people or talk to people, just in conversation, I always tell people, who you see right now is who you're going to see everywhere.
Yeah.
If you see me in the mall, if you see me in church, if you see me at work, if you see me in a meeting, I'm the same person. I don't live I don't have two personalities. I don't have how about this? How many times have you heard peers or leaders or subordinates or they're so worried about not wanting their coworkers to know their home life, or they're just dealing with I don't mix business. I don't mix my work life. And who can do that?
No one. No one. Because if you think about that, the word is balance that we've
Yes.
used. Here's
Yeah.
a balance.
Yeah.
If this is work and this is life, and life is heavy, work is light, is it?
Yeah.
There's no way that both can be heavy
Yeah.
in a balance. But in a
There's
blend,
yeah. There's this
they
joke.
can be beautifully planned out. I mean, I used to put on my planner 15 minutes, think about my wife,
Hmm.
because I didn't have anything else to really think about that would give me any strength in some of those situations.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just had to be intentional
Yeah.
about how I blended my life and my work. And there must have been something inside me deep that was there since the pulmonary embolism
Mhm.
wake up call that was growing and was causing me to do these types of habits. And I've learned one thing: if you don't have rules of life,
Yeah.
you're not gonna survive life. You're gonna go through it making game time decisions. And those are not very, they don't win Super Bowls that way,
Right. But if you
you
haven't
know?
been through, I always tell people, if you haven't been through something, then you don't know how to handle that left turn, right turn, those peaks and
Yeah.
valleys. I tell people all the time, we always look at what other people have. We always look at we don't sometimes people compare, that person has this leader has this, they're doing this, but they don't really fully understand what it takes to get there.
That's right.
What it
That's right.
takes to I do understand certain positions hold a lot of weight. They hold a lot of weight, and
They do.
decisions could change lives in any direction.
That's
And
right.
we know this been on the battlefield. One wrong, one second of hesitation could
Hmm.
change an entire. You could wipe out an entire battalion. As you been in the Air Force as a from a Marine, we're calling air support from the Air Force. And
Mm.
and sometimes those situations are close
Yeah.
fire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Real
we're
close.
telling you fire for effect. We don't need a practice round. And
When that A-10 hog comes in and
right,
starts shooting,
yeah,
you
yeah. And so if you
the sound
hesitate
of glory.
or
Yeah.
pause or and I think that's the big thing when it comes to these conversations is having to know when to be authoritative, when to be a servant leader, when to be a transformational leader
Yeah.
in various situations,
A
transactional leader.
situational
Yeah.
leader.
You
Yeah.
have to know when to be, what type of leader you need to be in that particular moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, I truly enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and before we leave, I would just ask if you would just give one bit of advice to, it could be senior leaders, it could be aspiring leaders, um, transformationally. What bit of advice would you just give them to help them make it through those tough times or lead in those tough times?
Well, hmm. You always want to make these moments the important one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I would say you need to know before you know. And the reason that I say that is knowing is faith, and faith gives us hope, and hope is then the knowing. But to wait until you know everything might be too late. But you need to know that you're confident in your process, in your leadership management, in your way that you interact with people at home and at work, at play, that this is the way that I roll. This is my way. And I'm confident in that. So I know that. I don't know everything about this situation, but I'm confident in how I'm going to get that information. And I I think that's the only rule of law for being successful as a leader, is to trust that you're not gonna know everything. Remember back in the beginning, I had that colleague that told me, dude, you only are gonna know 25% of what happens in your hospital, and that will make you great. Like, that did not make me feel comfortable. Know before you know.
Yeah, I like that. I'm actually writing that down. I that just brings up a huge point. Sometimes we can try to gather too much information before we even make any kind of decision, and I think that's right to your point. So tell us where we can find your books,
Yeah.
how we can get in touch with you. Just give us that information.
Yeah. One last bit of advice: get a coach. If your organization sponsors coaches, get a coach. Talk to your supervisor and say, I heard about this coaching thing, heard a couple of goofy coaches. I want a coach. Get a coach. And that's not a advertisement for me personally. I'm just telling you, get a coach. I wish I would have had a coach in some of the situations I went through when I didn't. And when I did have a coach, yeah, I did a little bit better than I thought I might. But so yeah, to get a hold of me, it's pretty simple. www.behold1.com. I couldn't just get the word behold with the exclamation mark, and so it's a one. But that's really how to get me. And the beauty of that is the first time you go on that website, there's going to be this beautiful pop-up that talks about the Amazon hot new release of Chemical Courage, Reframing the Bully Within for a Healthier World. And everything's available there too. If you even want to book a moment to just sit and chat about something you heard today or something that you want to explore, that website will get you to me. And now I'm going to do something that I want you to feel is very transparent. 906-869-1480. That's for two purposes. The first purpose is if you're a veteran and you're going through some sort of crisis and having some troubles, text me and let's talk, man or gal. I got your 6. Know what it is. And the second one is if you're a leader and you're in distress and you don't want to go to a website, you just need to get a quick drive-by, then text me.
I like it. I like it, and I would definitely get your information when I get ready to put this out. That way they'll have it again if they missed it.
Absolutely.
I truly enjoyed the conversation. What I liked about it is it was a very transparent conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to have more of is if we're transparent and authentic in the front with people who we lead, they're able to make decisions based on that. And I think the other thing that I want to leave us with is I see a lot of leaders. I have one senior, very senior leader said that he didn't like approving for his employees to go to training and development, professional development, because he knew once they became more trained that they will leave the organization. And our senior executive stopped everything. He said, "Okay, time out, stop," because he couldn't believe what this senior leader said. And he looked at him. He said, "You know what? The fact that you said that is a clear indication." I was on an audit team. We went down as an inspector, and we was just having a conversation with the leadership before we kind of broke out to our different teams. And he said that in the initial conversation, the introductory conversation, and our senior executive says, this is the real reason we're here right now. This is why your organization, this is why we're seeing some of the trends we're seeing because of that mentality right there. And if you can openly say that, then we have a bigger issue. It may not be the bottom half of the organization or the middle half of the organization. It may be straight at the top that we need to be talking to. So We got to be more. We have to really. This is the first time we've had so many generations in the workforce.
This is true.
And Gen Zers or Gen whatever the new generation is called, they don't think the same as a baby boomer, or it's a total different language, if you want to use it that way.
Yeah.
And and some folks are intimidated by that.
Yep.
And I think it is my assumption in my study is that the reason that we're shifting, a lot of organizations are going back to a top-down approach because they just can't grasp how to do this parallel, this shared leadership approach, and allow folks to. We bring in smart people.
Yeah,
we bring in some really good smart people, but we micromanage them and we don't let them do their jobs.
This is so true. It's
what
so
is
true.
that all about?
I had a boss that said once, that's charm school.
Yeah.
And this boss was anything but charming.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. The worst boss I'd ever had. Yeah. And really left some scars. The ones like you're talking about.
Yeah. I had one of those that left some bruises, and that's why I started doing this, because we talked earlier, we have a lot of people within organizations and companies that are suffering in silence. They get up hating to come to work. They're taking time to get to work. They sit in the parking lot. They don't want to come in the office. I used to have ulcers, and I would knot up. I felt so bad, headaches, and when I finally left that organization, every day I left that building, I felt that tension release.
Yeah. And because that was the acute stress that you were getting.
Yeah.
But guess what was causing the headaches and the ulcers? Chronic.
Yeah.
And it's inflammation. And the cortisol is the chemical that creates the inflammation, that creates the bipulmonary embolism.
And I run into this particular supervisor. We run every now and then, we run into each other, maybe at a retirement ceremony or whatever. And by the way, she's still a supervisor. All of the documentation and cases that have came against her, she is still in a supervisory position. And we won't talk about that because that'll take us down a whole nother.
It's all kinds of trouble.
Yeah. But yeah, that was one of those instances where it made me the leader I am today. It made me want to have these kind of conversations because people don't have to suffer in silence.
Yeah, we change things by talking about them.
Yeah. Yep. Well, again, James, I thank you for coming on to the show. I hope our listening audience will enjoy this conversation. And with that being said, we will close it. I just simply like to say peace.
Peace. Semper Fi.
Hoorah. And I will tell you, aim high.
Thank you, brother.
You've been listening to the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast. Edward E. Mosley Jr. has 30 years of leadership experience and is an ICF credentialed leadership coach. And it's his passion to inspire leaders who can foster a safe space where they can empower their followers to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities while sparking collaboration and creativity. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But until then, find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edward E. Mosley Jr. To contact the show, send your emails to limitlessboundsteam@gmail.com. See you next time on the Mosley Method Mastering Leadership Podcast.